Every species underlies specific selection pressures. It evolves through time. But this is not all to the story. Also, the landscape can have strong effect on the way species evolve. This is summarized by the scientific discipline landscape genetics. Today, we talk to Dr. Rachel Bdaniak from Macquarie University. Rachel is an expert on landscape genetics and will tell us how the landscape affects the evolution of species. Rachel, can you explain what landscape genetics is and why it's important?
So landscape genetics links genetic information with landscape data to understand how species disperse and move across diverse landscapes, but also how they adapt to different environmental factors. So this could be temperature, rainfall, or even vegetation types, which can limit gene flow in the landscape and have different impacts on selection pressures. So it's important to understand this so we can better understand species dispersal and also how well adapted they are to different environments. And incorporating landscape features into the analysis is really important because genetic differences don't just occur across geographic distance, but when we add landscape features into the picture, we can get a higher resolution understanding of what is really going on within the landscape and how those features are limiting or facilitating those species' capacity to move and adapt.
Can you give us an example, perhaps from your own research, how to integrate landscape genetics into conservation or ecology in general?
Sure, yeah. So one really important aspect of conservation biology is controlling invasive species. And one project that I'm involved in on the invasive bumblebee in Tasmania in Australia is using landscape genetics to better understand how the landscape is affecting gene flow and adaptation in this invasive bee. So what we found is that the invasive bumblebee in Tasmania is limited somewhat by precipitation across Tasmania, which varies widely, although it occurs across the whole island. And also we found genes under selection that relate to things like wing muscle function, which is involved in flight capacity, and as well as cuticle formation, which is involved in dehydration and drought tolerance and things like that in insects. So by understanding those adaptive traits through the genes and their frequencies in bumblebees, we can better predict where those species may spread to in the future and the kinds of locations where they might be best able to adapt if they undergo future invasion.
So global change leads to reshuffling of species communities at unknown scales. How do you think landscape genetics can help us to understand the future of ecosystems?
Well, one thing that climate change creates are changes in the distributions of species, such as species that undergo range expansions or contractions. So by integrating the landscape with genetic information, we can see where those species are most likely going to end up under climate change. One example from my own research is on the damselfly Ischnura elegans in Scandinavia. In this study, we have found that Ischnura is expanding its range north under climate change, and we've identified genes that correlate with temperature gradients that have functions in relation to heat shock or resistance to high temperatures. So by understanding the frequency of this gene across this temperature gradient that the species is encountering, we can better predict where this species is heading geographically under climate change. And in terms of species communities, we can better understand what types of interactions it might have and impacts on the species communities it encounters in its new range.
Genetics is a fast-moving field with new advances made every year. What do you think will be the next major steps forward in your discipline?
Yes, genetics is a really fast-moving field. One of the innovations that are going to hit genetics, well, more commonly in the future is the study of pangenomes. So what I mean by that is genomic information across all individuals within a species encompassed within essentially a single database or file. So this will change the way we map genetic data to reference genomes and replacing it with pangenomes. So it changes the way we can discover new genetic variants and genes under selection that might not occur on a reference genome, but might be picked up in a pangenome. So it will increase our power to detect evolution in species. Another really interesting innovation that is going to hit landscape genetics and the study of evolution in general is AI-assisted detection of selection. So we'll be able to hopefully query whole genomes using AI to find areas of the genome that may be under selection. So this AI-assisted detection of selection will help us to be able to predict phenotypes or traits or behaviours of species that we would otherwise need breeding experiments or other types of experiments to achieve this. So it will be quite a huge innovation in the way that we study species and their evolutionary traits. So it's currently quite difficult or challenging to find regions of the genome or genes that are under selection, especially in relation to landscape features or environmental variation. So if we can query databases based on AI algorithms, this is really going to accelerate our capacity to understand adaptation across landscapes.
Rachel, what would you recommend early career researchers interested in studying landscape genetics?
I think if you're interested in becoming a landscape geneticist, it helps to have a really solid foundation in genetics and genetics theory, especially population genetics and genomics, of course. It also helps to have a kind of landscape view of ecology and evolution for that matter. So to think about things at the landscape level, have an interest and a desire to work with geographic data, GIS, Geographical Information Systems, and also to answer applied questions in either conservation biology or evolutionary applications that can be derived from landscape genetic studies. Another thing that helps if you'd like to get into the area of landscape genetics is a desire and love of fieldwork, because we get to go to some really great places. We get to do sampling across broad regions of very different animals. And it doesn't tie you to working on a single animal. You can work on anything that's distributed at the landscape level.
A lot of your research involves fieldwork around the world. Do you have a favorite moment during fieldwork that you can share with us?
I do. So I've been working on the Galapagos Islands now for quite a long time, and I was really fortunate to be able to go there earlier this year, actually. And during the trip, we went on an expedition to the remote island of Santiago. So this is off the coast of Ecuador, the Galapagos Islands. And we got to stay in this very remote shack that was falling down. And it was really amazing because every morning we would wake up and there would be a Galapagos giant tortoise right in front of you, just out front on the doorstep, feeding from the little puddle out the front. And as we were walking around the field, it wasn't uncommon to hear a Galapagos tortoise breathing in the vegetation. They have a very deep guttural breath. Sounds like someone breathing very deeply. And so I would stand there and go, wow, there must be a tortoise somewhere near here. I can hear it. And rest assured, there it was in the bushes. So one day we were hiking up to an extinct volcano with our guides. We had 3 Ecuadorian guides helping us. And we're hiking up this mountain. The guides have machetes. They're working really hard to cut our path up the hill. And I hear the breathing. And I stop and I said to everyone, I think there's a Galapagos giant tortoise just somewhere here. And I'm saying it and everyone's like, what, really? Why? And then my student ahead of me turns around and says, that's Carlos breathing. it was just one of the guides behind me breathing. So I made a little mistake there, but that was a funny moment.
Wonderful. Thank you so much.
Thanks a lot.